Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Today, we have 4 students from Ukraine who will be discussing their observations and their perceptions of what has been going on since Russians started the war in Ukraine. We have Yelyzaveta Baurda, who was born in Odesa and studies at the Franko National University in Lviv. She writes articles about the war for the Polish media and volunteers for projects dedicated to the war. Next is Alyona Chernyshenko, who was born in Berdiansk, currently controlled by the Russians. She studied at the Faculty of Philology and Social Communications at the Berdiansk State Pedagogical University. As a researcher, Alyona is committed to human rights and linguistic diversity. Next is Mikita Fedorov, born in Donetsk, currently controlled by the Russians. Due to Russian invasion, he moved and studies at the Kremerchuk National University and works as a translator during international meetings in Britain, Denmark, and the Netherlands. He also volunteers for the war efforts. And last is Anastasia Kozlova, lives in Berdiansk. She studied Philology and Social Communication at the Berdiansk State Pedagogical University, which has been taken over by the Russians. She is interested in research and assisting the war. Over to you, Yelyzaveta Baurda.
2 days from today will be 4 months of Russia's war against Ukraine. More than 100 days we have been fighting for fundamental rights such as freedom, the right to live on our land, and the right to speak our language. Ukrainians slowly getting used to live in war, even though it may sound frightening. However, we still need a lot of strength and a lot of help to win this battle. Next slide. There are 3 main topics I want to cover in my presentation today. The first is how Ukrainian psych work in war conditions. The second is environmental impact of Russia's war against Ukraine. And the last but not least, definitely, future of young Ukrainians. Next slide, please. Imagine a picture where one object is clear and everything else is blurred in the background. These figures are constantly changing each other. That is what is happening now with everyday life and war. Since February 24, full-scale war has become the only figure in our lives. Relationships with friends, loved ones, education, work have gone into the background. For more than 100 days of the war, there was a big change in the situation. The war may move to the background position and something else will come to the fore. War in red zones is more likely to be a figure. For example, when I go to the cinema, an interesting plot of the movie becomes a figure. The air alarm begins and I need to leave the hall and go to the underground parking lot. The war against moves from the background to the foreground for me. It is currently impossible for Ukrainians to get rid of the background of the war. It's just not in the foreground all the time. For Ukrainians abroad, the war will be still a background, but more distant. If a person focuses only on war, he will be exhausted. When war remains only as a background, there comes an anxiety. We cannot pretend that war does not exist. Similarly, we cannot pretend that there is no life and no need besides war. Our task now is to learn to switch and accept the fact that firstly, it is impossible not to switch. And secondly, it is normal to have war either in the background or the foreground. And one way to make war come to the background is to do something which you really enjoy. I love writing, searching for interesting information, and making a change in my community. Next slide, please. So, in the first days of war, I decided to start volunteering for Soloway. Soloway is a media platform for informing the world about the war in the Ukraine. Now we translate the main news to 23 languages so more people can get educated about what is happening in Ukraine. You can support our media platform by simply reading a few main news every day and telling your friends about Soloway. It will also help. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about environmental impact of the war. The environmental impact of a single bomb falling in a field is disastrous. The crater opens up in the earth, the wildlife is destroyed, the ensuing immolation, the explosive release of heavy metals and toxic chemicals spreads throughout the landscape and atmosphere. This environmental nightmare is happening now in Ukraine, where the Russian military is routinely targeting critical infrastructure, as efforts to stop the war rightly focus only on minimizing deaths and the displacement of civilians, and environmental catastrophe will last long after the final Russian troops leave the country. And this could harm Ukrainian communities for years to come. Next slide, please. As of March 28, Climate Department at EcoAction had documented 110 explicit environmental crimes. Here you can see the diagram. Next slide, please. And the Pentagon database has recorded 1,200 missiles, and all of these missiles, bombs, and tanks contain waste. Now and in the future, heavy metals will be in our groundwater and soil. There have been at least 36 attacks on fossil fuel infrastructure, 29 attacks on electricity stations, 7 attacks on water supplies, and 6 attacks on nuclear facilities, EcoAction has noted. Next slide, please. After an attack on the Sumihim chemical plant in northern Ukraine, ammonia began leaking until it covered an area with a radius of 2.5 kilometers, threatening nearby communities by contaminating groundwater supplies, the soil, and wildlife. Next slide, please. And there are more environmental Russia's crimes. For example, forest fires caused by missiles near the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Russian missiles hit the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And also, oil and gas facilities in Kharkiv have come under heavy fire since the war began. Mariupol have become so heavily bombarded that it is now unlivable. Russia is destroying agricultural equipment and warehouses, and also ecological catastrophe in Donbass. All of these challenges have been made considerably worse by the war, and huge amounts of resources will be needed simply to get back to the country's environmental baseline prior to the invasion. It will take years and years to clear away pollution and toxic substances, and even longer for ecosystems to rehabilitate. The health impacts of the environmental damage could last for decades, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about something more positive, future of young Ukrainians. After the start of full-scale Russia's war against Ukraine, I noticed one interesting change. Young Ukrainians started paying attention to Ukrainian culture, music, and even language more than ever before. I also noticed that more young people are involved in volunteering now than 2-3 years ago. I think personal stories are memorable, so I want to share 3 short personal stories of my friends that show that Ukrainian youth is unstoppable. You can see a photo, the third girl from the left. This is my 19-year-old friend Ira from Yaremcha in city in Ivano-Frankivsk region. And on the second day of full-scale war, she created her own volunteer organization to help displaced Ukrainians. Now, her organization is not only helping displaced people, but also raising money for the Ukrainian army. By the way, we even studied together in Lviv. Next slide, please. My second friend is Kirilo. You can see a photo of his small business in Odesa. He opened a street food cafe with his friends only a few days ago. I think this is an amazing example of Ukrainian youth who can turn self-realization into helping Ukraine's economy. The thing is, by paying taxes, Kirilo's team directly helps the Ukrainian army. And the fact of starting the first small business during the war is truly empowering, to be honest. Next slide, please. My third example is Anna on the right, who is a founder of Ukrainian Volunteer Service. This is an NGO that popularizes the culture of volunteering in Ukraine. Anna's NGO won the Democracy Award of the National Endowment of Democracy on June 8. This award is given annually to recognize the creative work of organizations that have advanced the cause of human rights and democracy all around the world. And Anna, being truly an inspiring leader as she is, dedicated her award to every Ukrainian volunteer. There are thousands and thousands of inspiring stories of Ukrainian youth like this. I believe we will hear them more often in the future, in the peaceful and bright future, of course. Next slide, please. I also want to mention one of the most important things for Ukraine and for the whole democratic world that we hope will happen soon. On June 17, European Commission recommended Ukraine to be granted European Union candidate status. This will be approved, we hope this will be approved by the leaders of the Union at the European Union Summit on June 23 and 24. So it's more, 2 days more. Next slide, please. But for now, unfortunately, we are still living in the war that Russia has started. And it is very important to not forget about it. Ukraine will be free and remain free. We believe in this. But please remember, it is not a conflict. It is a full-scale war happening in the middle of Europe. Please get educated on the war. Support Ukraine. Share this knowledge with your friends, and then repeat. I believe that with your support and with help of the international community, Ukraine will end this Russia's imperialistic nightmare once and for all. This is all of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yelyzaveta, for a very interesting and informative presentation. We very much appreciate that you took the time to prepare it, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. And now our next presenter is going to be Alyona Chernyshenko. Over to you, Alyona.
Good afternoon, dear listeners. My name is Alyona Chernyshenko, and I'm from Berdiansk. I studied at the Faculty of Philology and Social Communications at the Berdiansk State Pedagogical University. Today, I want to talk about life in a city under blockade, as well as about the future that may await Ukrainian youth. Next slide, please, number 2. When everything changed. On February 24th, Russia attacked Ukrainian cities, launching dozens of strikes, including on a military unit in the southern Ukrainian port city of Berdiansk. Berdiansk is located on the coast of the Sea of Azov and lies between the Russian-controlled areas of Donbass and Crimea, occupied since 2014. Russia has long wanted to create a land corridor between these territories in order to improve the supply of goods and troops. That is why Russian soldiers were very quick to appear in Berdiansk. On February 27, the occupying troops entered the city. Residents hid in apartments and houses, cautiously watching from the windows as personnel carriers and the armed infantry that accompanied their move through the streets. The Russian military combed the whole city in search of Ukrainian soldiers and provisions. They were very hungry. Some went into the yards of civilians and asked for food, but they were not welcome. Doors were either not opened at all or people refused. But still, I want to tell you about our life before and after. Next slide, please. Before the war, I used to study for half the day and then go downtown to see my friends. We would go to the beach, read books, and plan our future. At 5 a.m. on February 24th, we woke up to the concussive sound of bombs as our windows came crashing in. It was the invasion of Ukraine. I and my friends didn't believe this war would happen. We were speechless, motionless, absolutely helpless when we found out about it. All our plans were put on hold because of the war. Our enthusiasm and plans were suddenly ceased, as well as we ourselves were different before the war. That was our first lesson of war. What you cherish can be taken from you in a moment, even your peace of mind. Russian troops invaded Berdiansk on the third day. We could see the troops just from our windows. There were queues in stores and at gas stations everywhere. It was impossible to find food. Everyone was leaving but didn't know where to go. I didn't want to leave my hometown and survived all the horrors of the blockade. Life turned into a complete hell. We were no longer sleep the same, no longer dress the same, no longer think the same. We are living in constant danger, but we work for our future and we believe in our freedom. Next slide, please. Life under occupation. Berdiansk stays in the blockade from the end of February till now. The coastal city would be preparing for the tourist season. Instead, there is little food, fuel, or heat, and you can be killed for refusing to give a soldier your phone. There have never been any of the Nazis or fascists which Russian propaganda talks about in Berdiansk. If not for the war, the city's residents would be busy preparing for the upcoming tourist season. In peacetime, the inhabitants of Berdiansk considered their only enemies to be the jellyfish and mosquitoes that scare away holidaymakers. And now it has significantly changed. In the first days after the Russians captured the city, bread disappeared from Berdiansk due to problems with gas supply and lack of flour. Bakeries reduced their output. Other products began to run out rapidly due to the occupation, and prices for scarce goods increased significantly. Shops are refusing to accept payment cards. Huge queues line up in front of those 3 or 4 that are still giving out cash. In order not to get confused, people write their numbers in line on their hands. In the 16th century, Berdiansk was an outpost of the Ukrainian Cossacks. The most activist residents have openly expressed their pro-Ukrainian position in the early days. There are a lot of patriots. Every day they went to the central square with Ukrainian flags and chanted, "Berdiansk is Ukraine, home." But soon the Russians began to detain the most local people and take them away to an unknown destination. The occupiers let someone out of the cafe at gunpoint in the middle of the day. They came straight to other people's homes. Next slide, please. Mariupol residents in Berdiansk. Since March 17, Berdiansk has become a filter city for the inhabitants of Mariupol, which has been destroyed by the Russians. People who were lucky enough to get out have to make a difficult choice in Berdiansk. To try to move further into the territory controlled by Ukraine or remain in occupation. In the first days, about 6,000 people arrived in Berdiansk from Mariupol. Most have moved on to the Ukrainian-controlled territories, but some remain in the city or are trying to leave for Russia or other Russian-occupied regions. Mariupol residents told locals in Berdiansk about the horrors of life under blockade. about many days of living in basements, about hunger and death, about corpses on the streets, about escaping the city by car and on foot with babies in their arms. These terrible stories made many Berdiansk residents reconsider whether to remain under occupation, and many decided to leave their homes just to get away from Russians. Next slide, please. The morning of March 24th provided a ray of hope. On this day, a Ukrainian missile hit Russian warships in the Berdiansk port. This means that the Ukrainians hadn't forgotten about their citizens in the southern city who are still waiting for liberation from their supposed Russian liberators. The first thing that Russians did after capturing the city was to occupy the TV tower and turn off all broadcasts. On the same day, the local point internet provided stopped working. Many people were kidnapped, and of course, the inhabitants themselves, especially women, suffered greatly from actions of the invaders. Next slide, please. But despite all the difficulties and hardships of the time, our people remain unbreakable and believe in the best. Whoever could helped the army, joined the ranks of the territorial defense. The mutual assistance of the inhabitants of the city was especially felt at that time. There weren't enough doctors, and people who stayed worked overtime, received sick residents from Mariupol, consulted and provided all possible assistance. Many residents volunteered to work delivering essential goods to people. Others tried to evacuate people from Mariupol, risking their lives. And most importantly, everyone were actively supported the territorial defense and the army with money, food, medicines. And as a result, the joint efforts of the Ukrainian army and ordinary residents yielded results. Next slide, please. Young people are open to new ways of thinking. The new generation of Ukrainians are educated, digital, more connected to the world, and with more rights than their parents or grandparents enjoyed. They are aware of it and they feel a big responsibility for the future. But they also know that it takes tremendous commitment to drive to take up the fight against deep-rooted structures and traditions. Ukrainian youth joined the newly established humanitarian hubs tasks to help refugees and people at the front line. Our young generation are doing their best to protect civilians from danger of mines. They're creating warning signs to alert people about locations where there is a risk of obtaining mine-related injuries. We will continue to do our best to help Ukrainians in every possible way. We will not give up on our communities. All we want now is for senseless war to end so that we can go back to our normal life. We're convinced that we have to reimagine the cities and villages of Ukraine. What was destroyed in the war should be rebuilt. We need to bring the best minds to the cities in Ukraine. We believe that the country will be back on its feet soon, as soon as possible. Within all these months, Ukrainians managed to make effective change in our community. Our government reached out to young people, organized different projects targeting them, and organized trainings for them. Next slide, please. Young people are still pushing for change in the country. Today's young people have dreams and expectations. They are not only important active participants, but they also play an important role as recipients of messages that promote tolerance and equality. The Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine at its meeting approved the state social program Youth for Ukraine. The program stipulates for the definition of measures in 9 priority tasks. To increase the level of youth competencies, including civic ones, to raise the level of volunteering culture among young people, intensification of youth involvement in decision-making processes, implementation of programs for training professionals, ensuring the functioning of youth centers, promoting the creation of conditions for the development of the capacity of civil society institutions, implementation of expert analytical and informational and final evaluation measures, implementation of international youth cooperation. Ukraine's population has the right to determine their own future and destiny and have their own history. Our generation will build Ukraine again. We will rehabilitate our roads, our schools, our hospitals, our houses and people. Fueled by knowledge and curiosity, we will walk again the path to become a prosperous, free nation. Next slide, please. Talking about future, I see myself living and growing up in Ukraine, making positive changes in society. Also, I see myself working as a teacher in flourishing European Ukraine. I want my country to grow and develop, so now I do everything to make it happen. My friends and I volunteer to make a change, to build a bright and peaceful future for us and future generations, of course. We are fighting for freedom, for our right to imagine and build our future in our own way. Our people stand heroically. We all continue to fight for our freedom in many different ways. Ukrainians know that the bright future is not that far away. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alyona. That was a very, very impressive presentation, and your focus on what has happened and how it affected your life was very, very influential. So thank you very much for your presentation, for taking the time of preparing it. And our next speaker is going to be Nikita Fedorov.
First of all, I want to say thank you for everyone that you comes for this meeting. And without further interruption, let's start. Today, I want to talk about what does Ukraine want? What future do we want? That's a rather interesting question, which every Ukrainian will answer the same way. For hundreds of years, our country didn't have independence. Foreign invaders used the resources of Ukraine while oppressing the Ukrainians. We were forbidden to speak Ukrainian, write books, or dress in our national clothes. Our eastern neighbor have been trying to destroy us for hundreds of years, hypocritically calling us their little brother. But Ukraine and the Ukrainians continue to fight. We gained independence, and now we are once again fighting for our existence with those who intend to destroy us. The next slide, please. Yeah, that's one. In fact, the history of Ukraine and the United States have a lot in common. We were a kind of colony for our neighbor. They exploited us and our lands without giving anything in return. But we were able to choose independence for ourselves, and now we are choosing our own future. And we continue to fight for it as it did the people of America in 1775. The next slide, please. So, what does Ukraine want? First of all, the people of Ukraine want peace and freedom. For hundreds of years, our people have shown that the values of democracy and freedom are not an empty place for us. Starting from the Middle Ages, when people gathered for a national assembly, which, in order to decide together how to act. In the New Age, our people who wanted to be free became Cossacks. Thus, a democratic state was formed on the territory of Ukraine, which has no analogies in the world, the Zaporizhzhia siege. And ending with our time when Ukrainians shed their blood to protect not only our country, but all the democratic countries of Europe. Throughout our history, the peoples of Ukraine have been fighting for freedom and democracy against authoritarianism and slavery. The next slide, please. Freedom is the most important value for Ukraine. Despite the fact that we lived for 100 years under the yoke of authoritarian power and the events of this time are still fresh in our memory, but at genetic level, Ukrainians still remain true to their values and principles. And we not only want freedom for ourselves, but we also respect the freedom of other people and the inviolability of the borders of other states. Ukrainian and Ukraine has never attacked any state, has not shown aggressive moods, but we are constantly fighting for democracy and the lives of people around the world. And to the best of our ability, we help all other countries. And the Ukrainians will never agree to submit to someone, so all attempts of the Russians to build a Russian world here are failed. Next slide, please. I myself understood what Russian world is 8 years ago, when in 2014, Russian troops captured my hometown. Donetsk in 2013, and now there is two different cities. The Russian razed it to the ground. The city, which was recognized in 2012 as the best city of Ukraine for business, a constantly developing city, has known what the Russian world is. Like Georgia, Azerbaijan, Moldova, and the other countries. I saw how the Russian military fired at Ukrainian positions standing near the civilian residential buildings. I saw children who died as a result of a Russian provocation. That is why I, like no one else, don't want to live under the yoke of the Russians. And I and other Ukrainians want to be free. 8 years ago, the war didn't pay attention to this aggression, which led to the fact that now children are dying all over Ukraine. Then everyone turned a blind eye to the deaths of people. But as you know, inaction breeds impunity. The next slide, please. And that's, you can see that's a Donetsk International Airport in 2012 and in 2015. So the next slide, please. That is why Ukraine needs help right now. After all, now we are fighting not only for our independence, we are fighting for the freedom of all Western countries. Ukraine is a frontier separating the free countries of the West from the authoritarian plague in the East, a kind of Hadrian's wall which protected Europe. We shed our own and other people's blood so that other Western countries don't have to do this. Our children and women sleep in the basement during air raids, so your children and women don't have to. We don't ask Western countries to fight and die for us, but we ask you to help that you don't have to die. We need all possible help so that we can protect Europe and the common values and ideals, so that we can protect the very idea of freedom of the Western world. The next slide, please. And Ukraine knows how to be grateful. We never forget about the good and like our common enemy. Ukrainians still remember how in the 1920s, the American Relief Administration and the American Jewish Joint Distribution Community saved Ukraine from famine caused by the First War, the Russian Civil War, and the Red Terror. When the Bolsheviks exported grain from Ukraine, then Americans feed our children and women. We still remember how the USA helped the USSR during the Second World War. Like an American Lend-Lease, which saved us all from a terrible death. Then America helped other countries to fight fascism through the Lend-Lease, and now. We Ukrainians remember all the good that other countries have done for us. So next slide, please. So what does Ukraine want? Like all adequate people, we want peace and freedom. We want to live together with the same democratic countries as we do, in peace and harmony with the whole world. That is why we are now defending the ideals of entire Western world: freedom, equality, brotherhood. That is what we want. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Mikita, for very informative presentation. Over to you, Anastasia.
Good afternoon, dear listeners. My name is Anastasia Kozlova, and today I want to talk about how difficult life has become for Ukrainians after February 24, tell about the events I experienced, and about our education process during the war. Next slide, please. I was in Berdiansk when the full-scale invasion began. I woke up at 4 a.m. when my friend ran into my room and I started looking out of the window. She heard an explosion. I tried to calm her down to find a logical explanation for the sound because war seemed impossible in the 21st century. And then there was the next explosion. The light in the windows of other apartments immediately lit up. We started gathering scenes. I was born in a small town in the Zaporizhia region, Ulay-Pole, and immediately decided to go home. I called my parents an hour later. I really wanted them to live a little more peaceful life. When I called my mother, she was gathering my little sister for kindergarten, and my father was getting ready for the work. They haven't seen the news yet, and I could only say, Mom, the war has begun. Next slide, please. Ulay-Pole is a small, beautiful town where everyone knows each other, the homeland of Nestor Makhno, and none of us could have imagined that such difficult fate awaited it. In early March, invading troops approached the town. Firstly, the light was turned off. Due to the lack of light, the water supply was cut off. Orcs jammed the connection. We could only sometimes manage to catch the signal and to write at least a message. And the next 2 weeks were the hardest in my life. Every day there was only grayness, and we had to hide in the shelter dozens of times a day. And every day I texted I love you to the people I care about because I didn't know if I could do it tomorrow. And one day my family and I actually went to the shelter under fire, and the shell flew right behind us. And then on March 12th, the full evacuation of the city was announced. My father put us in his friend's car and we had to go. It was the hardest thing to let go of my grandmother, to see my father holding his little daughter in his arms with understanding that he do not know when he will hold her once more. And the next slide, please. My father is an employee of the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, and I'm proud of him and his colleagues. They help people every day. They deliver drinking water to locals, pull people out from under the rubble of houses, and try to put out fires even when there is no enough water. I can hear how tired he is when my mom and I manage to call him. All that remains is to pray that he stays alive. Next slide, please. These days, Ulay-Pole is still under daily fire, and Russian troops use terrible weapons: hail, clusters, bombs, missiles. They destroy ordinary houses, schools, kindergartens, hospitals. It seems like they shoot just for their fun. And there are still people in the town.
people who don't want to leave their houses, who don't have money to go away, elderly people who can't even move. All gas pipes are broken, so are light transformers, and the town is slowly dying. Next slide, please. After the evacuation, my mother and I decided to go as far as possible. It seems that the war was following us and we had to go further and further without looking back. We were lucky to have relatives in Zaporizhia and Lviv, so we were able to stay with them for a while, rest and regain strength. Next slide, please. To get from Zaporizhia to Lviv, we had to use an evacuation train. We were lucky because the queue of people was small and we immediately boarded the first train. The conditions in which we traveled were quite difficult. There were 10 people in the compartment and everyone was traveling in the train together. People with small children, people with animals, and elderly people. It was not possible to lie down or rest normally. A woman with a disabled son and a 4-year-old daughter rode with us in the compartment, and it seemed even good because my little sister and this girl immediately became friends and they were on board. It was impossible to charge the phone on the train. There was no normal toilet. There was no possibility to change clothes or lie down. In the evening, the lights were turned off in the train because the trains were often fired upon. For more than a day, we drove only sitting, but in fact, it is still good because some people had to go standing up. Next slide, please. When we spent the night in Lviv, we heard explosions there too. We didn't feel safe, so we decided to go to Germany. Fortunately, we had enough money to travel by bus, but while standing on the border with Poland, I saw how many people were just walking by feet. It was only the beginning of spring, it was still cold, and the women were just standing there with small children in their arms in despair and not knowing what to do next. We stayed at the border for more than 10 hours and in general drove for more than a day. Germany met us with rain. When we arrived, there was no feeling that it was another country or another land, and I guess we were just too tired to think about it. But now I understand that we just felt ourselves out of place. Next slide, please. We're now in Port of Westfalica. It is the same small town surrounded by greenery and people who are extremely friendly. And only 3 months later, I was able to feel comfortable there. But over the past 3 months, we have faced many difficulties that refugees from Ukraine still face. Arriving in Germany, we stayed at our family friend's house at first, but a lot of people first go through a stage of life in a refugee camp. Schools usually become camps. Local camps are equipped with everything you need: beds, kitchen, washing machines, groceries, playgrounds, quite good conditions for a temporary stay. However, it is difficult for Ukrainians to adapt to European standards. We are used to the fact that in our country, you can quickly deal with documents, manage all payments through online banking, and transport and shops are open 7 days a week. Therefore, it is sometimes difficult to get used to new realities, especially when you're still facing the problem of the language barrier. We currently live with a German family who have decided to rent out their house to Ukrainian refugees. We have great conditions. The people we live in help us with everything, explain if something isn't clear. They have 3 grandchildren who immediately became friends with my sister, and fortunately they know English very well, so I can easily communicate with them and help. My mom found out about us. They brought us clothes and other necessary things that we didn't have because we got there very quickly and took only 2 bags of things from home. And there are many such families who are ready to help Ukrainians. And in fact, we are very grateful to all the countries and people who sympathize with us and try to help. Next slide, please. After February 24th, of course, our education was suspended. And after Russian troops entered Berdiansk, it was threatened. We spent March thinking about how to survive and not fully understanding what would happen next. And so when I found myself in Germany in April, of course, I began to worry about learning. Studying takes up most of my life. I love my university, I like studying. Thanks to our wonderful teachers, I found myself and understood what I want from life. And I kept in touch with my teachers all the time, so I knew how difficult it was for them too. Some of them stayed at home in Berdiansk in the occupied territories, but also a lot of went to other parts of Ukraine and abroad. In early April, many Ukrainian universities that resumed distance learning began inviting students whose universities were at risk to complete the semester for free. So the next month, I studied at the Lesya Ukrainka National University, and I'm very grateful to the management and teachers of this university for their support. Many of the students have become my friends, and we're still in touch. In May, the resumption of studies in Berdiansk State Pedagogical University was announced. Our university is currently legally relocated to the city of Zaporizhia, so we have the opportunity to study. And I was extremely happy with this news because I really missed my teachers and the subjects we learned. But there's still everything was not so easy. Many students and some teachers of our university are still in the occupied territories. There is no Ukrainian connection in the internet in Berdiansk, and only some people have the internet, but you need to be careful and use VPN programs. Many other students have left, but also have problems with the internet. Fortunately, Germany has given Ukrainians the opportunity to have a phone card with unlimited internet until June 30. So I have the possibility to enter lessons and complete all tasks, but not everyone can. Next slide, please. I really hope that by the fall, we will all be able to return to our university. In fact, it hurts so much that teenagers, kids, people in Ukraine have so much difficulties, and students' years are very difficult, first because of the pandemic and now because of the war. I'm very grateful to you for all of your attention, and I will be glad to hear your questions.
Thank you, Anastasia, for very, very interesting also and informative presentation. And I'm glad that you have found some relief in Germany, and we look forward to hearing your opinion of what has happened since you left Ukraine. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach, and thank you so much, Yelyzaveta, Alyona, Nikita, and Anastasia for such insightful presentations. The first question from our audience is for Anastasia. I know that there is often no mobile connection in parts of Ukraine where hostilities are currently taking place. Do you have the opportunity to call your family, and how are they doing and feeling during this time?
Thank you for the question. And sometimes there is no connection, but sometimes there is some signals, and we can be in touch with my father and my grandmother who stayed there, and their feelings are quite different from time to time. One day they can feel like positive with a mood for the winning, and another day they can feel desperate. My father is at work day from day, so he's very busy and he's very tired because of it.
Thank you for sharing, and sorry to hear about that. Really appreciate the genuine response. The next question is for Yelyzaveta. To what extent do Ukrainians make an impact on the views of foreign politicians by disseminating information en masse during the war on social networks? How impactful is sharing that information on social media? And do you think that they're really making an impact on the views of foreign politicians?
Okay, so in my mind, I think it really helps. First of all, like a big change can only be possible if all of us make small changes. So if a few people will post information about the war or like the main news of the day in Ukraine on their Instagram page or I don't know, Facebook, and their friends will get educated by it. So I think it will make a change. Like small changes will be like will make a big change, and I think this can really help with our image for people abroad. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question is for Mikita. What are the opportunities for Ukrainians in Ukraine? And do you think they compare to opportunities that are available in other countries who are willing to support Ukrainians during the war?
I don't think that it's really matter what help do you, what kind of help do you give to Ukrainians, because I think that every kind of help is helpful. You can send your money and you can be a volunteer, and that's all worthwhile for me, I think.
I think what Susie mentioned is, do we have the same opportunities as our friends abroad? And I think it really depends on the war zone that you live in. For example, I live in calm zone in Lviv now, but in 2 weeks I will be back at my home Odesa, and it is not as calm as Lviv, you know. So I think we have more opportunities if we live in the safe zones, because now I can just go for a walk or maybe live with the war in the background of my life, but when I will come home, it will not be possible.
Thank you for sharing. So the next question is for Alyona. How should Ukrainian students continue studying given the current situation, which may decrease their motivation to immerse themselves in learning because so much is going on in their country? Should they postpone their studies for a few years, or can we improve the learning environment for students today?
Despite our current situation, I think that we should keep on studying and never give up, never stop learning. Of course, from the very beginning, even for me, it was very difficult to study and somehow to improve myself because all my thoughts were focused on this war. And first of all, I was worried because of my family, of my friends, and I tried to think about something else. And first of all, I tried to think that this war will end in a week, in 2 weeks, and it stopped, and I procrastinated a lot. But nowadays, and I'm very grateful that country supports Ukraine, and they give so many opportunities so that Ukrainian students can keep on studying and improving themselves. And they are all free. You can learn any language as you want and improve yourself. So I'm pretty sure that more and more Ukrainian students will improve themselves, and they will never give up because we are strong, we are brave, and we will win.
That's amazing and inspiring. I think during hard times, it's when sometimes you feel even more motivated. So
yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question we have, we was hoping to get a response from each one of you. We can go in order of the presentations: Yelyzaveta, Alyona, Mikita, then Anastasia. What are the main reasons for you to stay and plan your futures in Ukraine, despite all of the struggles happening today and potential opportunities in other countries? So Yelyzaveta, over to you.
Okay, so I don't know how to explain it, but I think the person who asked this question, or everyone in the Zoom call, should imagine what will happen if they just leave their home. Like, I think it is very difficult, and Ukraine feels like home to me. And even if I ever move abroad, which I don't think will ever happen, I will be really homesick, because this is my homeland and my culture, my language. I don't think I can be myself in the same way I'm being myself here in Ukraine. So I really believe that if Ukrainian youth stays, the Ukraine will only develop and become a real European progressive country. And 10 years from now, 20 years from now, our kids will live in this flourishing country. So that's why all of us stay here, and that's why all of us still fighting.
Thank you. Alyona, anything to add there?
Yes, of course, we're still fighting, and I'm also in Ukraine, and I just couldn't leave my country because it's my home. I love Ukraine. I love my country, people, and I see myself living and growing up in Ukraine, making positive changes in society. We need to inspire, motivate our young generation to improve, to be better. And I want my country to grow and develop. And so now I do everything possible to make it happen. So for me, I just can't imagine myself being in another country because it's my home. And I'm sure that I hope to get back to my hometown after this war as soon as possible. Yes, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And then Anastasia, what's your response to the question?
I guess it's pretty obvious. It's my country and I won't leave it. Like, you help when the person feels sick, you help when the person have problems. So we need to take care of our country. And now I'm abroad, and the only thing I want is to go back home to my country, and to every city I can visit in my country.
Thank you. We actually received 2 more questions. So the first one is, what changed the most in students' lives with the new phase of war, and what new difficulties did it bring for all students in the country? Was hoping maybe Alyona could respond, since we were just talking about education.
Yes, as I've already mentioned, of course, it's procrastination, and most students, as far as I know, some of my friends, they stopped learning and they wanted to give up. But even though, despite this war and everything, we continue studying, and nowadays we've got more and more exchange programs, and students, they can go abroad, they can study in some universities, and after that they can get back home to Ukraine and share this knowledge with the upcoming generation. So I'm pretty sure that, of course, we have a lot of problems and we will overcome everything, but education is still in our life and it will be forever with us. Nobody will take it away from us. And as long as our children keep learning and our teachers keep teaching, we are undefeated. In this war, every Ukrainian has his own front, and by continuing to learn, we fight for our future. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question was hoping once more to get responses from all of you. So what motivates you to not surrender during the war? Yelyzaveta, could we start with you?
This is a really difficult question.
I know.
Yeah, but I think it just comes with the time. Like in 2 days, it will be 4 months of the war, and you know, you just get used to it, and you start to notice things that you have never noticed before. Like you start appreciating relationships more, your friends, and even like eating an ice cream in the park. So I think it's about little things.
That's beautiful. Alyona, would you like to go next?
Yes, of course, I would like. First of all, it depends on us. Ukrainians, actually, we are very brave and we are patriotic and we are such a strong nation. And it's quite obvious to notice that we will never give up. And our president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is quite a great example for all of us. He is a role model and he is the most inspirational and motivational person that we have nowadays. So he is a great example and he motivates me a lot not to surrender and hope for the best, and we will definitely win. So yes, thank you.
Agreed, he's amazing. With Anastasia, please.
I guess I agree with Alyona and Yelyzaveta. It's people who motivates us, who keep us, keep our strength, keep our motivation, keep our inspiration. Not only our president, who's a great person, but also our ordinary people like our army, our volunteers and other. It's a great motivation. It helps a lot.
Thank you. You've all taught me a lot and definitely inspired me. I'm sure the rest of the audience can say the same. We've concluded our Q&A, so I'll turn back to Dr. Durbach to close.
Thank you again, Yelyzaveta, Alyona, and Anastasia, and if you can hear Mikita, for very informative and very emotional presentations that basically show the world what the war in Russia has been doing and has created in the devastation in Ukraine. I am very pleased to see that all of you have the courage to stay and work in order to be building a Ukraine that is democratic and free and will allow you and your children to work in an environment that will be conducive to your future. And in the meantime, have a very, very good week. Thank you again, Susie, for the hosting. And I wish all of you a very good week and a good future. Bye-bye.